Welcome to 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. I'm your host, Brian Slagel. I am the CEO of Metal Blade Records. You can go to metalblade.com for more information on that if you would like. This episode, we're going to talk again about Kiss because they were my favorite band growing up. So, of course, I'm very much inclined to talk about them, but also such an influential band when you look at metal, and so many of the bands have cited Kiss as a big influence. And like me, they were their favorite band growing up as well. So, and you can count, 100 members of 100 major metal bands that all love Kiss. So we got to go back and talk Kiss. We got to talk about early Kiss. So we're talking about the song Love Gun on this episode. And we're going to talk to my buddy. You may not know him if you're not a hockey fan, but if you're a hockey fan, you know him, Scott Laughlin. He is the host of NHL Morning Skate on Sirius XM, NHL Network. He's a huge rock and metal guy, so it'll be really fun to talk to him. We're going to do some production stuff with our producer, Mr. Christian Bladt, but we're going to begin it all, as we always do, with Mr. Martin Popoff.
Yes, indeed, Brian. Kiss Love Gun, an important song in heavy metal history. Of course, Kiss is a very important band in heavy metal history. This would be, I suppose, the third album of the trilogy of their sort of golden period. You've got Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over, and now Love Gun, issued June 17th, 1977. We've got Eddie Kramer producing, brought back after Rock and Roll Over to make an album that is very similar to Rock and Roll Over. Funny thing about this song, it's sort of in the camp with Shock Me from this album as well. The Ace Frehley song on here, written by Ace and sung by Ace. Shock Me is a song that I always thought was heavier than it really is. I mean, nowadays when I listen to it, I go, that's not very heavy. And Love Gun's kind of in that same camp. This is a song written by Paul and sung by Paul. And, Paul has something of an extreme voice, right? It's a shouty vocal fry sort of voice. And he is really pushing some air here. There's a lot of energy around the vocal. It is a heavy metal song, but it's kind of like just hanging chords. It's not particularly riffy. It does have that machine gun intro, which is quite dramatic and heavy. It's essentially chordal, but it is dark enough sounding chords that it's not particularly poppy. I suppose the heaviest song in this album is I Stole Your Love, the opening track, which is also written by Paul and sung by Paul, but that's a truly riffy song. Love Gun, open side 2. I always consider this the badass position on an album, the side 2 opener, and it is, of course, the title track. But yeah, big song, important song. It's an anthem. It's one of their lascivious sexual double entendre sort of lyrics. It is the most played song from this album on Spotify alone. It's got 99 million views. So yeah, important song from a big record, a record that went platinum. After this, we're going to get Alive 2, which gives us the studio side. But after this, we've got kind of a ponderous 1978 for them with double platinum, a greatest hits album, and then the 4 solo albums. So yeah, this, great album, part of the golden period. Ken Kelly is back again for the dramatic cover art. He did Destroyer as well. He does this one, great cover. And an album that is very similar, not so much to Destroyer, but quite similar to Rock and Roll Over. Yeah, I would say this is pretty much the highlight song on the album, Love Gun from Love Gun.
Excellent, Martin. Excellent views, and he mentions a lot of things which make a lot of sense. Although, and he talks about it not being as heavy as he thought it was back then. But that's kind of the thing, is when this came out in 1977, this was very heavy. This was extremely heavy, heavier than a lot of stuff we had heard outside of Sabbath and Deep Purple maybe, but still very, very heavy and influenced just so many bands that went on to be huge metal bands. So that's what we're talking about. And again, I talk about the 70s rock and metal stuff because I love it, number one. But number two, this is the foundation of heavy metal, and this is where it began, and this is how we became where we are today, talking about it still in 2026. So now let's bring in our producer. The Bruce is our show, Mr. Christian Bladt, to talk about the production of Love Gun. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. And, if I get to talk about Kiss, obviously I'm very excited. I've got a Kiss shirt. I've got my Kiss mug. And, Gene would point out that there are Kiss condoms and Kiss coffins because they'll get you coming and get you going. I don't go that far, but short of that.
I have a Kiss mug here as well that I'm using as a holder for my, not for anything liquidy, but for my
Well, this one even has it's got a bunch of album covers. It even has this great Ken Kelly cover here.
Yes, love Ken Kelly.
So Love Gun, obviously the song is what we're talking about predominantly, and he's talked about it. Paul wrote the song basically in his head while he was flying to Japan, but over the years he's been a little bit more upfront that it's not entirely an original composition. So blues guitarist and singer Albert King had a song called The Hunter. And Paul said when he was a kid, he saw a cover band singing this song, and the lyric was, "I'm a big bad hunter, baby." But he thought, "I really love you, baby." And then he realized, oh, okay, that's not what the words are, but he saved it because he's like, well, I'm going to use that one day. And look, it's a great way to start off a song. So he did go on and, let's just say, borrow some more lyrics, because in that same song, Albert King says, "Ain't no use to hide, ain't no place to run. I got you in the sights of my love gun." So he's using the phrase love gun in that song. And
Wait, hold on a second. So the Albert the blues guy used love gun? Oh, wow.
He refers to his love gun in it.
I did not know that. Wow.
I didn't know that. And I was so worried that Martin, because he knows everything, that he was going to take that from me. And I was so glad when I got it. I saw a couple of videos. I went and listened to the original song just to make sure that, you don't want to be wrong when you're accusing Kiss of something. And so he did that. And then there's also a song by a band called the Blue Magoos. They have a song called We Ain't Got Nothing Yet, but there's the part right before the last refrain where it's the really high love gun, the like that comes from that song. And apparently Paul just sort of like hummed it for Ace, and you hear it. And, if we didn't have to worry about rights and stuff, I'd play it now, but people can look for it and you can hear it and go like, oh yeah, that's really that. So look, it's a great song, but he like kind of cobbled together some things, and from really unexpected places.
Yeah, but that's kind of, so many of these songs have that. Look, the first couple of Led Zeppelin records were basically completely plagiarized, where they had to go back and credit people. But that's what happened in a lot of the 70s stuff, is they went back and used a lot of the blues that came before them and kind of updated it and made it a little bit heavier. And I think what Paul did was probably more, and I think he's talked about it, where, he definitely was influenced by that sort of stuff.
Sure.
And used little things here and there. But there's other... Look, there's Metallica songs that sound exactly like early 80s, either LA metal bands or New Wave British heavy metal bands, or, Iron Maiden, for example. I forget which song it is, but one of the songs, there's a sweet song that is almost the exact same chord progression that Iron Maiden is. It's really super heavy, sweet song. So they're it's borrowing is okay, I think. Taking little snippets here and there is okay.
Yeah, it's completely different when, you get into more modern times, and, not that this is music that we would normally talk about on the show, but Vanilla Ice trying to say that, no, that is not under pressure, but it's like, no, it's obviously under pressure that you have playing underneath you. And then Queen and David Bowie are listed as songwriters on that.
Yes,
so that's a completely different thing. This is just like, oh yeah, okay, you got that stuff from somewhere. And I don't know. I like to hope that that the original artist Albert King made enough money on his own that that this wasn't one of those things.
You never know though, because one of, like I said, I've talked about this before, but I read a lot of rock autobiographies. I've read almost all of them, I think. But one of the best is Mick Fleetwood. Sure. And Mick Fleetwood was talking about Fleetwood Mac when they first came to America. This is before Buckingham Nicks were in the band. This is when Peter Green was in the band, and they were like basically a blues band, but they're blowing up in the States. The first time they came to the U.S. and they're playing these 10,000 seat arenas, and they're Muddy Waters or the people that they were worshiping growing up, and basically the whole band was, because of those artists, was playing like a 600 seat club down the street when they're playing. And Mick Fleetwood was like, this makes no sense. He should be playing here. We should be playing that small club. That's not the way it works. But that's what happens, is all that. All the rock and roll all stem from the blues, from the US, by the way.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And you don't want to really trace, you don't want to really break down Elvis's songs and see, how much of it was again borrowed, so yeah.
Yeah.
I think
that was very much prevalent back then. But anyway, so on to Love Gun.
Yeah. So Love Gun, the album, Love Gun, the song, produced by Eddie Kramer, of course. and he had done Rock and Roll Over, as Martin said. So, it ain't broke, don't fix it. And of course, before that, Hendrix, the Stones, Zeppelin, and so many more. I don't have time, but like those are the big ones where you're like, okay, yeah, I think we would want to sound like that. And he does go on to produce Ace's solo album, and I think that a lot of people feel like that's the best of the four.
It is, because it is.
that's why, because it is the best. But so you're the producer, you don't do it alone, and I wanted to dig deep on the engineer. So this was at the record plant in New York, and Corky Stasiak is the longtime engineer there. So he did Destroyer, Rock and Roll Out. He did Destroyer, Rock and Roll Over, Love Gun, and Alive 2. So Martin's kind of talking about this being the absolute peak of Kiss. And this is the guy who's, sliding the faders and turning the knobs on all of those. He also did Toys in the Attic, Welcome to My Nightmare, and Frampton Comes Alive. So, this is a guy who gets to work on some of the biggest records.
He has a pretty good pedigree.
Yeah. So he actually had so he kept notes at this time. And he said that they began recording Love Gun May 3rd, 1977, completed it on May 28th. They had a few days without Ace, but then Ace showed up. The thing that's absolutely shocking to me, they finished recording May 28th. The album was released June 30th. So like a month later, people have this album. And that seems really fast, especially for the 60s. I don't know. I mean, 70s. All the records you were involved in. Yeah, sorry. That seems really fast even for the 70s. All the records you were involved in. Does that sound like a little too short of a turnaround, like a month, Brian?
Well, yeah, these days, of course, it's impossible. Yeah. But you could do it back then in the 70s because all you really had to do was just manufacture the records and put them out there. And it wasn't the whole music industry was a lot different back then than it is now. There wasn't the big buildup, and you didn't have the internet or any of those sort of things. And you just put the record out and you put a bunch of ads in all the magazines that are coming out, and and it's all over the record stores, and people just go, okay, it comes out. So it doesn't surprise me. I've heard a lot of that 70s stuff. The turnaround was pretty quickly. I mean, look, a lot of those artists back then, including Kiss, were putting out 2 records a year. Yeah. So, they're recording a record and putting it out, and then 6 months later, there's another record, which is kind of insane when you look at, now these days, it's like, 2 or 3 years, if not more sometimes, for bands to put out records. But you could do it. Quick, funny Metallica story about that. So they were doing the Black Album. I was in the studio kind of towards I spent a lot of time there because it was next door to my favorite sushi restaurant in North Hollywood. So I would hang out there. I'd just say, hey, I'm having dinner. Are you guys over there? Yeah, come on over. So, but anyways, there when they were kind of finishing up the Black Album and they're looking at the album cover or what the blackness of the album cover. But anyway, I was asking him, like, when are you guys going to be done? And they said, I think we're done here, like, probably in the next week. They said, so when's the record coming out? I said, oh, probably about a month from now. I'm like, what? Like, how is that possible? This is, the early 90s. Yeah. And it's Metallica. So they can just, if we want it out, the company's going to put it out. So, and it did okay. So it didn't seem to hurt them.
Well, and I think that's the important point too, is that this is before the Black Album comes out. This is the Black Album. So they were big enough at that point that they're like, yeah, we're just going to put it out in a month. Yeah. And,
But the interesting thing about Kiss and about both Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun was I remember going back, and we've talked about Detroit Rock City and obviously Destroyer on this podcast as well, and obviously big production and yada yada. But of course, their height of success was Kiss Alive, and they wanted to go back famously after the Destroyer thing with Bob Ezra, and they want to go back to, like, let's just go back to making like basically a live record. And that's what they did with Rock and Roll Over. In fact, I think they recorded a lot of that in like a studio, not a studio, like a theater or some sort of concert hall or something. So they kind of kept that live vibe. So it doesn't surprise me that it took them 3 weeks to record it, because they're basically just doing everything live, pretty much overdubbing some vocals and some leads, and that's about it.
To the point you were making about putting out 2 albums a year. So I mentioned that this album comes out June 30th, and yes, it's a live album, but Kiss Alive 2 comes out 4 months later. So it's almost like this had to come out in June because that was going to come out in October. So you don't want them to come out too close together. And of course, all the tours. So the interesting thing is that you can find the demo for this song out there. It's all over YouTube. I made sure I was listening to the right one. So you listen to the demo, and it's basically the same song, and that's not always the case when you hear a demo. The lyrics are the same, the songs arranged properly, the harmonies there. It's just like a less good version of it. It's almost like you were listening to Love Gun on the AM radio in your car with like one speaker blown out or something, but it's the song. And that's not usually what the demo is. You know, you're usually like hearing them work on it or whatever, but he had the song, he had it figured out. And I would say this really is sort of that absolute zenith of peak Kiss. So this and Alive 2 later this year. And this is the last studio album that it is really just the 4 original members playing all the instruments and singing. But even so, Paul plays the bass on this song on Love Gun. And that I think is just as simple as it's all in my head. Let me play it. And, this isn't the era where Gene, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, sorry to say, I think there was a lot of that because if you listen to both Rock and Roll Over and this record, you listen to Gene's songs and you listen to Paul's songs, and they're very different. Gene, the guitar tone on Gene's songs are very different because what I've heard is Gene is playing the guitar on those songs, and then Paul's playing the guitar on his songs, and then obviously Ace plays on his songs. So if you listen to those songs, the songs that those guys wrote on those 2 records, you can really tell like who was playing the guitar on there. And yeah, it just made sense. Like, hey, I'm just going to go in and make the track, and I'll just play bass on it. And, at that point, they were all pretty big. And he talks about it in his book, Gene was doing a million other things and not really paying that much attention to Kiss. This record didn't have a lot of, I love Plaster Caster, but it's, he didn't have a lot of really big hits aside from, I guess, Christine 16, which of course we can't talk about now, but
yeah.
But yeah, so it's not a surprise that he played the bass on that song.
Yeah, we're at the point where Paul and Gene's kids who have a band, they're too old to sing Christine 16. So it's that problematic of a song.
Well, these in 2026 you can't do that, or some of those other songs that are about underage girls, because that's not right. So it is weird though that we think about the 70s like, that was kind of funny and cool, and now it's like, no, that's just not the way it should be, which is true.
Right, but and then you're like, oh, but that song's so great. Can I enjoy the song and not the message? I guess is how you have to separate it.
Yeah, well, that's all of art these days. Go back, look at there's a lot of movies that came out in the 70s. You can't really, you can watch today, but it's like, oh wow, that's pretty inappropriate. But yeah, so different time.
Very different times. Paul has said that this is his favorite song to perform live, and it shows. It's been in every tour since then, and I checked out a bunch of different live versions, but obviously in recent tours, this is his moment where he tells us how much he loves us, and he's like, I want to come out and see you, and he like swings out, and he does the little stage, and I've had seats by the little stage, so I take like 100 pictures because he's right in front of me, and then I never look at him again, but it's exciting that he's standing right in front of you. And I was listening to the version on Alive 2, and I'm like, oh my God, Peter's drums are great on this. But then I had to think, is that Peter or is that Anton Fig? I don't know. Like, did they sweeten it in the studio? You know what I mean? Because I'm like, well, Peter's really killing it on this song. I choose to believe that that's Peter, but you were at the Alive 2 shows, right, Brian?
I was at all of the Alive 2 shows, and not all of the songs that they played live ended up on the record. In fact, there are several songs on that record that are live, but they never played. And the set list is all different. And it was, I'll never forget when I got it, because I went to all 4 of the shows they played in LA and when they recorded it. Those are the only 4 shows they recorded. And I get the record. I'm like, oh, this is a lot different than the show that I went to, in terms of they didn't play this song, they didn't play that song, and the whole sequence was a lot different. But I was a kid back then, so I didn't know. I was like, this. At first, I was kind of like, well, I like the record, but it's not live or what I saw live. But after being in the business, you kind of get it. It's like, okay, I see what they were doing, and it makes sense. But it is weird though that they played. I think there's 3 songs on there that are live. I'm not talking about the 5 studio songs.
Sure. On
side 4, but 3 songs that are live that they never played live. And Tomorrow and Tonight, there's a couple others that they never played at those shows. So they clearly went into the studio and recorded them and then added crowd to it.
Should I assume that this is before you started bootlegging every show you went to, so you couldn't listen to your actual version of Alive 2 from your archives?
Correct. Yeah, I didn't start recording shows until 78, I think. So yeah, I didn't have the technology or the ability to do it at that point. Plus, it was Kiss. I just want to go see it. I don't really care about recording it necessarily.
You don't want to do the work. The last thing I want to talk about, Martin did touch on it, but again, the placement of this, and that's so important in this era, especially in the 70s. It's the first song on side 2. It
Yes.
could easily be the first track on the album, but I think that is more of a testament to how great I Stole Your Love is. To, you drop the needle and that's the first thing. I think you could switch either of them. I think it's perfect the way it is, but Love Gun is that strong of a song that it absolutely could have. But I think the idea of winning people over with side 2 is very important,
Yeah, and that was what we talked about a lot of this podcast. That was the art of sequencing back then, is you had to have a really strong song to begin side 2. And a lot of times the song that begins side 2 is sometimes the best song on the record. And I would go to say that on this record, that's the way it is. Although, I love I Stole Your Love, and it's a great opening track, and it's, upbeat and it's really fast and all that stuff. But I mean, Love Gun's the premier song. But, having it be side 2, I mean, there are countless. Number of the Beast started, side 2 for Iron Maiden's album, and there's a lot of great songs like that. And that was kind of the artwork, is like not the artwork, the kind of the frame that you had to do was, we need a strong song to begin side 2, and this one being one of the best side 2 starters ever, probably.
Right. And again, you referenced the greatness of I Stole Your Love, and it's worth mentioning the first time that I ever saw Kiss, they opened the show on the Hot in the Shade tour with I Stole Your Love. So the first song I ever heard Kiss perform live was I Stole Your Love. And, I wasn't as familiar with all the album tracks. I'm like, this is amazing. So it is a great starter. And, I'd love for them to, when they do 2 shows every couple years or whatever, still think about starting with it. But,
and that's, by the way, that's the song that they opened every set that I saw that when they're recording a live 2. And of course, the first song on a live 2 is actually Detroit Rock City, which they did not start with.
Yeah, I know. It was a lot of like, what wasn't on a live 1? Let's go through that. Let's go through that songbook. But yeah, so obviously it really is this great snapshot of the best moment of Kiss before it all kind of quickly, unfortunately, starts to unravel. As Martin pointed out, 1978 is really when it starts to go off the rails.
I mean, that's when it's just they became too big. They became way too big, and they became too big too fast and too much touring. I mean, they all talk about it in all their books pretty much the same way. Just they got too big too fast and probably a little too much ego. And then, you get to Dynasty, which I love. I absolutely love Dynasty. I think it's a phenomenal record. But I remember going to the show in 79, and about 40% of the crowd were young girls, like teenage girls. It was really weird. Or young kids. It was really weird. It was like, it was so loud. The kids were so loud. It was like trying to watch the Beatles or something. Half the time you couldn't hear it. And that's when I knew, like, okay, it's over now.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like the crowd was the crowd very well could have been like, Sesame Street on ice. You're not talking about, these are just young high school kids.
And, and it's, and it's also, the change of every decade there's a change. There's always a musical change and whatnot. So it made sense, but it's all good.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it's a great song, great album. No complaints from me, Brian.
Yes, I know. Well, thanks for doing this, man. It's always good to have you on talking about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it.
All right. Longtime media guy covering the National Hockey League and hockey in general. You can hear him Monday through Friday on NHL Morning Skate, one of my favorite programs, by the way, on the NHL channel on Sirius XM channel 91. Mr. Scott Laughlin, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Brian. Pleasure to be asked by you to come on here and talk about one of my favorite topics.
I know, big music guy, which I always love listening to the show in the mornings because you get lots of great bump music coming in. And I know you're a huge Kiss fan. So we're kind of slowly winding down with our 100 songs here. We're up to about number 80, I think. And I was like, I got to do one more classic Kiss song. So I was thinking in my head, and I go, oh, Scott, like, let's get somebody in here that's a big fan. It's fun to talk to people that are real fan. I mean, not that everybody I'm talking to isn't a real fan, but it's fun to talk to people that are big fans that aren't necessarily in the music world because they have a different take on things. So yeah, so thanks for doing it.
No, really appreciative of you asking me. And I've told you before, Brian, you know this to be true. Out of all the bands I've ever seen, there were very few that I can say that I missed out on. Fortunate to have been privileged enough to go to these shows. and probably it's neck and neck between Kiss and Motley in terms of the bands that I've seen the most over the years. So whenever they would come to town, whatever the year was, different cities, I would make sure to go see Kiss. That's for sure.
Yeah, same here. I mean, they were my favorite band when I was in high school. As everybody knows, they were my first concert ever in 1976, which was incredible, on the Kiss Alive tour. And I think I went to, I'm still trying to, I really wish I would have kept better track of this back in the day, but I think I went to anywhere from 30 to 50 of the reunion shows in the mid 90s, because it was just so great.
Absolutely. I remember seeing the first reunion show that they did, which was at Skydome. So now they call it Rogers Center. Rogers Center, where the Toronto Blue Jays play, but they called it Skydome back then, and it was their first reunion show back at Skydome. And I remember seeing Doug Flutie there. You know, Doug Flutie is a huge music fan, right? Like Doug Flutie has hung out with everybody from John Bon Jovi to you name it. Doug Flutie's a drummer, of course, in his own band as well. And I remember seeing Doug Flutie walking around, and I remember seeing Dave Stieb too, arguably the best pitcher in Major League Baseball back in the 1980s at a Kiss show one time too. So they've got such a fan following. We know that to be true from 73 onwards. And as we know, right now we're kind of in limbo as to what really is going to happen with the future of Kiss and the avatars and the Kiss cruises and different things that they'll pop up at along the way. So I'm excited to see where this goes, despite the fact that we think that they've played their last sort of tour.
Well, breaking news in regards to that is they are going to again do the Kiss Landlocked cruise in Las Vegas. So that's that just came out today, actually. That
awesome.
It's out for public consumption. So they'll be out. And I didn't go last year because I was like, I'm not a big. I love Kiss, but I'm not a big fan of the conventions necessarily. And I didn't realize they were going to do a whole big long electric set with playing a bunch of really cool old songs. So now I'm like, Dad, I wish I would have gone last year, so I may have to do that this year. But we're talking Love Gun and the song Love Gun, which is I'll get to that in a little bit more in a bit. But I wanted to start off with you because you came in a little bit later on Kiss. You were a Kiss fan starting like in the 80s, and then you went backwards, right?
Yeah, when I was a kid growing up and I first got turned on to radio, Brian, I remember in the late 70s, I mean, you know what was being played on the radio, right? Pop music especially. It was about disco. It was about disco. And I remember walking around as a 9-year-old kid with a Bee Gees t-shirt because that's what everybody was listening to. Saturday Night Fever, the soundtrack had taken off and the whole bit. You know, meantime, I'd be at the cottage and I'd go to the convenience store, and right beside the convenience store at the cottage, there was a garage. And inside the garage, there was a band that was playing Detroit Rock City. And I thought, oh, this sounds kind of heavy. This is kind of cool. But no matter, time goes on, and never really did get on board at that point. But in 1982, I was in junior high school, so I was about 12 years old. And in 1982, grade 7 and 8, I met a guy named George. We'll just call him George. And he turned me on to Kiss. He kept on saying, Kiss this, Kiss that, the whole bit. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I should look more into this band that took the 1970s by storm. Then, of course, when Creatures of the Night came out and I saw the video, and we're just on the cusp there, right? A video and really taken off with MTV in the US and Much Music in Canada. When I first saw the video, Brian, for I Love It Loud, like I was hooked. I'm like, this is so heavy. I love this band, the whole bit. And at that point, as you know, Kiss was denying that they would ever take the makeup off. And, you know, nobody wants to see Superman without the cape sort of an attitude. And then, of course, as we know, a year or two later, all of a sudden the makeup comes off. But it was back in 1982 when I got turned on to the I Love It Loud video. Went and I bought Creatures of the Night, which to me still is one of the 3 albums I would ever take to a desert island. If I could only listen to another album for the rest of my life, that might be it, because it is the heaviest Kiss record that we've ever heard before. And although it wasn't the most commercially successful, Brian, as you know, to me, it still holds a special place in my heart as a Kiss fan. And as I said, I wasn't a 1970s Kiss guy, but I became a 1970s Kiss guy afterwards, because what did I do after 82 and Creatures of the Night? Well, I went back and, of course, searched out the back catalog and went and got Destroyer and the debut record and Love Gun and Rock and Roll Over and different albums like that. And ever since I've been a fan.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, when you come on, and I have some other friends that came on during Creatures as well, which is, as you mentioned, the heaviest Kiss record of all time. And we've talked about War Machine on the show already, which is maybe the heaviest Kiss song. I could argue Strange Ways, but that's a whole other very deep-ended Kiss track. But so going in with the heaviest stuff and then going back to the 70s, which was still, you know, heavy, and that's why we're talking about it, because it had such an impact on what became heavy metal and so many of the bands that came out in the 80s. that are metal and be. What was your thoughts going back? Was it like, oh, this stuff isn't as heavy as Creatures, or did it take a minute, or did you immediately lock on like, no, this stuff is great?
Well, look, Destroyer for me, when I went back to the back catalog, Destroyer jumped off the page at me. And those were songs clearly that were getting radio play back then on rock radio stations and such too. And there were selected tracks on all the different records that would kind of stand out to me as well. Of course, being an adolescent, Brian, Great Expectations stood out to me just for different reasons, right?
Wow.
It was like when I first heard Big Balls by AC/DC, and Dirty Deeds got re-released in the US, I guess, circa 1981. I remember with Dirty Deeds walking around with a little cassette player, having it cranked up in the neighborhood, people looking at me like, what's this guy doing? But I got a chuckle out of Big Balls on that Dirty Deeds record too. So just selected songs on each album that would stand out for sure. And I love the fact too, and it was starting with Love Gun, right? Where actually Ace was the final member to actually sing a song on a respective Kiss record. And that became fairly consistent up until Ace left the band, as we know, right after Dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, Ace has a great voice. It's kind of a bummer that he didn't sing. Well, some of the stuff that, he wrote earlier, like Black Diamond, Peter Criss is so good on that one. Love Gun is an interesting song. And the reason why I chose that was, so there is there's arguments all the time amongst a lot of us about, Kiss or Aerosmith. And I love both. But back in the day, back in the 70s, when those two bands were there, Kiss was, the fans loved them, but the critics did not at all. And they would, and even like music, I call them music snobs sometimes. But like my friends that worked at record stores and stuff were always like, why are you buying these Kiss? These guys aren't any good. Aerosmith is so much better. And I, for whatever reason, fine. People have their opinions, obviously, and critics especially. But when this album came out, and specifically this song, I remember a lot of the critics would pan Kiss earlier and said they weren't that good songwriters and they weren't really structured the songs very well and all this stuff. All of a sudden came out and were praising this song and being like, oh, this is the first real Kiss song where it's a really great song and it's heavy and all these different things. And I thought that was really interesting. You're finally coming around now. And this was the song. And it is a really good song. And it is some really heavy riffs on it too.
Well, look, I think the fascinating thing about Love Gun, when you look back on the song in particular too, Brian, is the fact that Paul Stanley played bass on the song. And the song was essentially done by three members of Kiss. Everybody but Gene Simmons kind of played a part in that song in particular, right? And that's always something that's fascinated me too about the music business. And a lot more about it clearly, Brian, than I would. A lot of it's done with smoke and mirrors, right? And a lot of fans would be surprised to find out that this guy didn't play on this record, but this guy did, and the whole bit. A lot of moving parts, whether it's a live performance, whether it's the studio, different things are done to make a song and or an album, and then a tour, a live performance, come off the way that they want it to as well. And it's something that reminds me of what Bill Parcells once said, a longtime legendary NFL coach, as you know, Brian. And he said, when someone's pregnant, don't tell me about the labor, just show me the baby. Like, I just want to see what the end result's going to be. And the fact that Paul Stanley wrote the song and played bass on it. Now, are there varying viewpoints as to why Gene was not playing bass on that song? A lot of people think, well, because Paul wrote it, he wanted to come up with his own bass lines for that particular song. Others, of course, as we saw, and it wasn't until right after that Gene Simmons kind of got into movie making. And as Paul has documented many, many times over the decades, Gene was a little bit distracted from the actual rock and roll thing. So Paul Stanley kind of took over from that standpoint too. So it always has fascinated me though that the song that Paul Stanley says is one of his favorites to perform live in concert, the one that he says has got to go down on that top 5 list of quintessential Kiss tracks. He's always felt like that was one of the ones that we should focus on, and yet only 3 members of the band really participated in the creation of it all.
Yeah, well, remember, this is right before the solo records came out. And part of the reason the solo records came about was because, they were all kind of dabbling in their own things. And I even questioned, listening to the song again recently, I even questioned whether that's really Ace playing the lead on there. And I've gone down the rabbit holes and haven't really seen anything in there about that. And I know nobody really talks about it in any of their books. We obviously know, on Destroyer, Ace is not playing all the leads on that record and some of the other stuff. But this is it's a fairly simple lead. and a lot of it is doubled, and a lot of it is harmonic, which could have been Paul maybe, and it's kind of over the vocals at the end. It's a really interesting thing, and I think it's Ace, but I'm not sure if it's Ace, and so there's a lot of those questions in the 70s. I mentioned Aerosmith earlier, and of course, it's a lot of those Aerosmith records where those guys weren't all playing on those records either. But yeah, it's interesting that Gene didn't play on this, and it's a really great bass track too, which is interesting. And the other thing about this song, and really Paul in general, we all think about Gene being the big demon, the big heavy guy, and but Paul wrote most of the really heavy songs that Kiss ever did, including this one.
He did, and you said something earlier too that stood out to me, Brian, and the fact that in the 1970s, especially, Kiss were really, really maligned in terms of being musicians, being really credible musicians. And it really says something, I think, in the fact that, Paul could write the song. Paul would play, like you say, maybe some of the guitar parts as well, and at the very least, the rhythm. And he would be the guy that would play the bass lines on it too. So it is a little bit ironic that these guys are criticized. And look, I know along the way too, Gene's played some guitar on some tracks as well, right?
Oh,
so
yes.
The guys did overlap to a certain extent at times as well, which is, like I say, ironic given the fact that, as you rightly pointed out, they were kind of criticized and maligned as musicians, especially back in the 1970s.
Yeah, and I always argue about that, and my friends argue about it. Peter Criss was probably the one that gets maligned the most, which I find really interesting, because I mean, look, he's not shredding on the drums and doing it. He's not Neil Peart or anything like that, obviously, but he was a really capable drummer, and he had that really good swing that worked for Kiss. And I taught, because I can't play any instrument whatsoever. I can barely do a 4/4 beat on the drums. That's about as far as it gets with me. But I've talked to other drummers. Specifically a guy like Charlie Benanti, who I think is one of the best from Anthrax and Pantera, one of the best drummers ever. And he loves Peter. He can go in deep about what Peter's playing and how that really affects the songs. And it's complex, and people don't realize how complex it really is because it seems simple. But that was always the argument back then, and even today, people kind of harp on that a little bit. But because they've become so big and so popular now, I think people go, okay, it's good. And and again, the influence they had on everyone is just insane. Not only just the music, but the show and the theatrics and the whole thing.
Yeah, and look, Peter was the first, and I know Paul mentioned in one of his books that he always felt like the late great Eric Carr, who I believe was Kiss's best drummer ever. But I'm in love with the Creatures of the Night album, and throughout the course of the 1980s, of course, I'm a product of all that, so I might be a little bit biased, but I really loved Eric Carr from that standpoint, that he provided that heavy drum beat to Kiss. But as Paul mentioned in one of his books too, he said that he always felt like Eric, was a little disappointed. He was always sad. It always bothered him that he was never the original drummer for Kiss. The original drummer, Peter, had done all the heavy lifting, of course, to put them in a position where they could kind of take off. And as we know, I mean, things are right around Creatures of the Night, and that's why I mentioned earlier, despite how great and heavy Creatures is, it was never their most commercial record and didn't sell nearly as much as they had hoped. And at that time, let's face it, they were having a hard time selling out some arenas along the way. So it was still an uphill battle, I think, for them. But as we know, once the makeup came off and the MTV age came of reality, I think things for Kiss really got back on track.
Yeah, they had their renaissance, just like Alice Cooper did, and a lot of those bands when all that stuff happened. And Creatures came out in the 80s when that's when the underground metal was kind of coming back again, and Kiss kind of got that record for some reason kind of got overlooked. I, as a Kiss fan, though, I mean, I love that record, but I was kind of happy in a way because I mean, look, seeing them in arena is certainly better than seeing the stadium. But on that tour, I remember they played the Universal Amphitheater in LA, which I think it was like 6,000 seats at the time. So I'd never seen them play in an arena that small. So as a fan, it's like, wow, this is really cool. We're so close to the band now. And it was, just from that perspective, it was really great. But yeah, it wasn't their biggest album. But we look back on things now, and I think a lot of people talk about how influential that record was to so many bands too. Because like, wow, here's Kiss, and it's really heavy, and it's a lot different than what they were doing before. So yeah, always interesting. And on Love Gun too, so I've had this argument recently a lot, and we've talked about it on this podcast. So you go to Destroyer with Bob Ezrin, and Bob Ezrin, I mean, look, this massive album, and Bob Ezrin's this amazing producer, but it's definitely very produced. And after that, they went back to Eddie Kramer for Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun. And I prefer the more raw sound that they got on these two records. Look, I love Destroyer, and I think it's an amazing record. I'm just wondering from your perspective, because I know you said you really love Destroyer, did you notice the difference in production, and what did you feel about that?
Yeah, I would agree, Brian, that Destroyer was a little bit more, shall we say, FM radio friendly, perhaps. You could clearly hear that there were going to be hits off that record. And that's not to say that, Love Gun and Christine 16, which, by the way, decades later is a little bit creepy, obviously, with the lyrics of Christine 16. Yeah, but we've come a long way in some areas, and we've fallen back in others. But anyway, regardless, I think the song Love Gun, I mean, you look back on it, a lot of bands, as you probably know, look back on that as really a kickstart back to some hard rock Kiss. And maybe that was something, that maybe parlayed into something down the road. And while it might not have been necessarily Dynasty, by the time they got to 82, things had kind of changed there, and the whole music environment and landscape had changed as well, too. So the song Love Gun, as we know, I mean, Paul talked about some of that being a rework off a Zeppelin track from years earlier. So it had a great influence, I think, in him writing the song and wanting it to sound the way that it did. And certainly coming out of it, it influenced a whole lot of bands out there. And then, look, there's a reason why Paul likes playing it so much in concert. It's a hard rock, heavy type song. And, they've performed it in every possible tour and situation since then. That's how influential that song's been. It's always been a staple. It's always been in the set list for Kiss since that was recorded and that album back in 1977 too. And look, fans got a kick out of it. Everybody talks about, Kiss and the stage show and so on and so forth. Now, I think you and I, we can say are Kiss fans because we like to listen to the music, number one. The stage show's fantastic, yes. I always used to take offense to that, Brian. People would say, well, you must like Kiss because you like to see things explode and Gene Simmons with the blood and the whole bit. And I'm like, no, the music still is what does it for me. If it was all about the look, I wouldn't still be listening to Kiss here in 2026 like I was way back then, for sure. But getting back to the fact of the matter is that it's always a great live performance because Paul grabs the trapeze, of course, and goes out over the crowd onto his own little solo stage. And you get the guys, of course, backfilling on stage, performing the music that way as well, too. So it's a very interactive song, I find, not only to listen to as far as the record goes, but most importantly in concert as well.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's an amazing song live, and good songs usually can transition from being on a record to live, especially Kiss. I think Kiss was one of those bands that really, well, as it got past the first three records, and we got to the live record and everything after that, they still sounded pretty good on record, but they were always better live. They were heavier live, they were better live, and not just. I'm talking musically. I'm not talking about the theatrical part of it. Just musically, they're always really good. And this is one of the reasons why Kiss Alive is one of the biggest records of all time, because they're such a great live band and they sounded so great. And I'm with you. Like I love the music. That's number one for me. But I also love the theatrical part of it too, because I don't want to go and see a band just standing around on stage, and I want to see them do something. And you started with Alice Cooper, and Alice Cooper had the same. And we've talked about this a lot on this podcast, where he was really, really influential on so many ways, but that all got overlooked because of all the crazy imagery and all the stuff that he was doing, and the just how controversial everything was.
Yeah.
You forget about how the music was some of it's like really, really heavy. Like I've always argued, like, listen to Halo of Flies. Halo of Flies could be a Black Sabbath song. I mean, it's that heavy. And the same thing with Kiss. I think Kiss kind of gets, I want to say demeaned a little bit. Some people don't like them as much in the metal circles, but most everybody I know, again, these bands in the 70s were the bedmark of what became heavy metal. If it wasn't for all these bands, we wouldn't be talking on a podcast right now about it.
No, absolutely. And look, I mean, the whole history of rock and roll, as you know, is just littered from torchbearers, right? Guys that would pass the torch on, and whether it was Sabbath and Zeppelin to the likes of Kiss and Aerosmith, I mean, just the whole lineage of it. You take the torch from us and we'll move forward. I know we've all talked about the concern, quote unquote, concern that we've got about today's rock and where it's going from here. But when you take it back 40, 50 years ago, there's no doubt that there was a definite passing of the torch, and Kiss was a big part of it back then.
Yeah, I think, and I've talked about this a lot to a lot of people and I've talked about this on this podcast before too, but I mean, rock's in a really good place right now. I mean, as of the first part of 2025, there's a company, I keep forgetting their name, but they do a big like hour-long YouTube video, and they take the global music sales and they dissect all of it into genres and all this different stuff. And I believe it's the same in the second part of 2025, but we don't have all of that information quite yet. But the number one, this is in music sales globally. Number one is hip hop and R&B. Number two is rock. Number three is pop, and number four is country. And rock, a lot of that is because you had Ghost had a number one record and Sleep Token had a number one record. So people are wondering, like, well, where's the next stars coming from? Well, look at these two bands. Here's two bands that had a number one record on Billboard, and they're both selling out arenas around the world. And they're the new next generation of metal. And you can argue about Sleep Token. That's not quite my thing necessarily, but I love Ghost, and I think those bands are definitely carrying the torch, as you mentioned, to the next generation, which is very good.
Well, look, we hope that there are going to be others that will carry that torch and pass it on in the future too. And we always keep telling ourselves, music is cyclical; it's going to come around once again. I don't know that it's ever going to be the way it was in the 70s and 80s ever again. But again, I'm a little bit biased because that's kind of when I grew up and kind of your wheelhouse as well too, Brian. So we'll see. We can only hope because it was a lot of fun back then. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm super excited about where things are going in both the rock and metal world. There's tons of really good new bands, and the scene's very healthy, and it's doing good. I mean, I don't think it's ever going to be the dominant genre again like it was in the 70s, as you mentioned, but I think we're in a really good place. So I can't have you on here and not talk a little bit about hockey, because as everybody knows, that's my second love, or maybe even first love sometimes over music, is hockey. So we're right on the eve of the playoffs. How are you feeling? Who are you feeling of the teams, the teams to beat them? It seems like there's 3 or 4 that he's kind of talking about.
Yeah, look, I think it's fairly wide open here as we get set for the Stanley Cup playoffs. And we did our predictions earlier, and I said I'm going to go with the team that I said would win the Stanley Cup before the season began. I predicted Colorado would beat Tampa Bay to win the Stanley Cup, so I still have to stand by that prediction. I haven't seen too much that would dissuade me from thinking that way too. But for the most part, especially in the East, I feel like it's wide open. In the West, you can talk about Colorado, Dallas, and Minnesota, and the last team standing certainly is going to be the favorite to win it all. Something near and dear to you, the Vegas Golden Knights, I think might be getting hot at the right time, Brian. They look like a totally different team with John Tortorella behind the bench on an interim basis. The smiles, it looks like, have kind of returned to the players' faces, and maybe that's all they needed was that coaching change and a new message coming from behind the bench. And, oh, by the way, it has helped out Vegas in the fact that Carter Hart has started to rediscover his form from a few years ago. So I think Vegas is dangerous as well. I would expect Vegas would be the team that would basically come out of the Pacific. And as I say, they'll probably face Colorado when it's all said and done in the West. In the East, I've got Tampa to win. My heart says Buffalo because we're so near to Buffalo, just a few hours down the road and across the border to Buffalo, New York. And those fans, as you know, Brian, have been through the ringer the last 14, 15 years or so.
Oh, yeah. It's so great they're back in.
Yeah. So my heart says Buffalo. My head says Tampa. And I think Tampa ultimately is going to beat the Pittsburgh Penguins when push comes to shove. Everybody talks about Carolina, yes. But there's got to be a lot of respect out there for Sidney Crosby being back in the Stanley Cup playoffs with Malkin and Letang and Erik Karlsson. So I think Pittsburgh's very dangerous. I would expect them to get past a young Philadelphia team and then essentially to match up against another team en route to at least making the conference final.
Yeah, I'm fairly with you on all that. I did pick Carolina. I have Colorado and Tampa, with Colorado winning as well. But before the season, I picked Colorado to go to the finals, but I picked the Florida Panthers to repeat. But that was before Barkov got hurt. So but I had to keep my pick. So
well, you get to watch Barkov at the World Hockey Championship coming up. That's a pretty cool story in the fact that, hey, if they hadn't made the playoffs, Brian, if the Panthers hadn't gotten back in, well, then Barkov likely would have been seeing some action in the Stanley Cup postseason. So what could have been, but I'm with you on the Panthers. I think next season, because I think they're the NHL's version of the Indiana Pacers in the NBA, where they lost their best player, banged up. You just chalk it up and say, this is one of those years. Next year, we're back at full 100% health, and we're going to be the team that we once were.
Yeah, agreed. Although I will say it's hard for me to root for Carter Hart for reasons that if you know, you know. So that makes it a little tough for me being here in Vegas. But I do think my little dark horse here, though, again, are the Edmonton Oilers, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I wish that Connor McDavid would play more of a 200-foot game. I think if he did that, he would be a Stanley Cup champion at this point. But still, they have the easiest route. And this has been the way it's been the last couple of years. Because you got, as you mentioned, Colorado, Dallas, and Minnesota, maybe the three best teams in the league are all in the same freaking division. And they're going to beat the heck out of each other. I saw that last year because I went to all the Dallas Stars games in Dallas. And they were a beaten team by the time they got to the conference finals. And Edmonton just kind of, the Kings gave them a problem for a minute, and then they beat Vegas, who was all beat up too, and it was an easy way in. They didn't have to do anybody or play anything, so they were fresh and ready to go. So they could do the same thing this year. Although I don't know, I don't trust just Tristan Jarry or Connor Ingram necessarily in goal, but somebody gets hot. I mean, Vegas won the championship with Aiden Hill, who. You could argue that he's not much better than those guys, but he got hot at the right time.
Well, look, I think Connor McDavid said it after the season-ending victory over Vancouver. He said, we've got a lot going on right now that we're excited about. And I think, number one, it's him, as it always is. But secondly, they've got Hyman back. They've got some secondary offense up front, which has always been a question about Edmonton. Okay, beyond McDavid and Draisaitl, and by the way, Draisaitl's been skating, so we'd expect him to come back maybe as early as Monday. Maybe it's early in the first round, but he'll be back because he's on the ice now competing once again with his teammates. Connor Ingram is giving them enough goaltending right now to think that they might have somebody. I predicted they'd beat the Ducks in 5 games. I called it a gentleman's sweep. I think the Ducks are a good matchup for Edmonton. I think Los Angeles, crazily enough, Los Angeles would have given Edmonton a better go than Anaheim will, only because the Kings can play that defensive style. They can frustrate you. And although Edmonton's beaten Los Angeles in 4 straight playoff series, Brian, I think the fact is they've all been competitive, and the LA Kings have had opportunities to win those series. So I like this draw, to your point, Brian. I like the draw, especially to start against the Ducks, because this Ducks team is relatively young. They're not great defensively, and that's where I think that Edmonton's power play, and eventually with Draisaitl coming back to join McDavid, they're going to have no problem scoring goals in this series.
Yeah, those games should be like 6-5 or something.
Yes.
So that might be kind of fun. But yeah, I'm on the same page with you on all that sort of stuff. Is there anything else like recently, music wise, that you've been listening to that you like? Like, what are you listening to in general, just music wise lately?
Well, look, I mean, my wheelhouse, as I've told you, Brian, is between 76 and 96. And all those bands I listen to between 76 and 96, if they bring out something new, sort of the old classic bands, it's funny, though, when you grow up, you think, okay, classic rock, 1970s. Now I'm getting to the age where classic rock is 1980s.
Yep.
It's my wheelhouse stuff. I mean, it just gets older and older as you go along, as the years go by. So anything that anybody brings out that I've listened to in their heyday, I still support it. I can't wait to hear the new stuff. I'll listen to the CDs. You and I talked about it too, right? Going back to Vegas in September. I did purchase the latest Youngblood CD, and I enjoy it. I enjoy Youngblood, and I know he's polarizing from a lot of respects, but the fact that he's out there and he's kind of made the turn, because I look back at some of his back catalog as well, Brian, and he did a lot of different genres early in his career. He's been around for 10 years or so. Some of the stuff he did was more dance-oriented, pop-oriented, hip-hop a little bit. So he's kind of experimented here, there, and everywhere, but it feels like he's come into his own being a pop/rock star. And he's got a little bit of that sort of Billy Idol frontman in him. So I like what he's doing. I enjoyed his latest CD.
Yeah, I'm on board with Youngblood. I'm not 100% there. I've seen him live, and I liked him a lot live. But he's very much, as you mentioned, he's a combination of Billy Idol, Johnny Rotten, and Rod Stewart. You can put them all 3 of those together, and that's kind of where he is. So he's not super original in that fact, but his fans don't know a lot of those people that well. So they are for him. I just think he needs the right song, and that the duet he did with Aerosmith was great. That's probably the best song I think he's done, other than his version of Changes, obviously, which is a whole other thing. But yeah, I'm on board with him. I think he's really good. I think he just needs that right song and the right record, and he'll. I mean, he's already getting massive, but I think he'll get pretty massive.
And I like too, Brian. We talk about the lineage and passing the torch too, and it really rankles me when I hear people say, "Well, all they're doing is copying this." Well, at some point, everybody had to copy somebody, right? I mean, everybody talks about, the Stones and really taking a lot of what the blues artists did, and Willie Dixon back in the day, and Muddy Waters, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody had to take from somebody else. And you're right. I mean, Youngblood fans may not know much about Billy Idol. Maybe this gets them out there, not only listening to Youngblood and some rock music. maybe this gets them out there looking at the back catalogs of this guy, Billy Idol, that's going to be in the Hall of Fame, as we know now, too. So I like the fact that it still keeps the younger people involved, realizing that rock and roll has existed for a long time. Maybe it's coming back. And just because this guy's doing it doesn't necessarily mean that he's a complete innovator, that he's new, but it just means that he's waving that banner just a little bit more strongly.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, Kiss, Paul Stanley mentioned that he wrote Love Gone off of a Led Zeppelin riff. So I mean, and those bands, Sabbath and Zeppelin and Purple, they were all just basically blues bands that were copying the blues. Fleetwood Mac and all that stuff was there. So you're 100%
Soundgarden,
right.
Alice in Chains from Black Sabbath, just all the different influences, right?
Exactly, 1,000,000%. One last question for you before I let you go. So the bump music on NHL Morning Skate, you always play a lot of really good hard rock and metal stuff. Are you involved in that, or is it Tyler, or who is it that's choosing all that stuff?
Well, it's a great question because over the years I've had a lot to do with anything that's hard rock, and the stuff you like is what I like, Brian, too. So we can relate to all that. And I would say as the years have gone on, because the joke around the shop is that, well, Laughlin's got his personal jukebox going, right? Like I'm the guy. Hey, it's not your personal jukebox. Just turn the microphone on and talk about hockey. Well, hockey and music is my overlap, and I love it. And people like you recognize it and love it too. So, look, there's a niche out there for it. To answer your question, though, going back to when I used to work different day parts and I work in the afternoon drive show or at different times of the day, maybe I had a little bit more influence. You'll notice on the NHL Morning Skate now, too, especially on Friday, there'll be an awful lot of EDM. Now, I think there's a time and place for EDM. When I'm working out, sometimes I'll put Calvin Harris on or Tiesto or Diplo or what have you. But that's usually the other guys, the younger guys on the show and the producer and technical producer of the program that really put that together. But anytime you get a hard rock track that's out there, and I joke that I've got some sort of contract where there's got to be, at the very least, now that we don't have War Machine kicking off hour number 2 as the bump at the top of the hour, we've got the Rover by Led Zeppelin, which is also something we selected, by the way. Now that War Machine's not a part of it, I said, you got to make sure you promise me one thing. Play me at least one Kiss song each and every morning here on the program. And anytime they don't, I said, did you guys not read the fine print of that contract and agreement that we came up with? So, when you hear hard rock or metal on the morning show, I've always thought, Brian, best way to orchestrate a morning show, Brian, is to get people up out of bed. Give them the energy that they need to take on the day. Right. And you know as well as I do, there's nothing more energetic than turning it up to 11.
100%, my friend. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. I've enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks, man. You can't leave yet because we have to. There you have it. That was a fun one. Always love talking about Kiss. And it's always great to talk about Kiss with other fellow Kiss fans. Scott Laughlin, always great to have him on. Such a good guy. And I've been on his show a couple of times. So I had to get him on my podcast. In addition to big music fan, obviously his hockey knowledge is off the charts. And if you're a hockey fan, please listen to NHL Morning Skate. And of course, producer Christian Bladt, who is one of the biggest Kiss fans I know. So it's always good to have him come on and talk about production, since he is the producer of the show. And Martin Popoff, of course, always has good stuff, even though he's not as big a Kiss fan as we are. But we won't say that. Lizzie Borden, who is another big Kiss fan, for our theme song. And of course, yet again, the guy putting it all together, Mr. Christian Bladt. We'll see you guys next episode.